Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LCS Week 6 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. This is a very fun episode of LCS weekly recap action. There is so much to talk about. It was a relatively expected week in the LCS this week, but there were still a lot of really fun games, a lot of games that went quite a while and went to the wire. So definitely some fun stuff to talk about. This is a little bit of a birthday episode for me. I feel very lucky. I get to do my home region here of North America in the LCS on my birthday. So that is a very lucky draw here on this Friday. But before we jump into the games, let me know down in the comment section below which game you were most looking forward to this week. There were a lot of good ones to choose from. And we're actually kicking off here day one with one of those games that I think I was most excited and most interested to see going into this week. So kicking off day one here for week 6 is going to be a matchup between FlyQuest and Cloud9. And this was an incredibly interesting one for me here, mostly because if FlyQuest can really come out and show a lot in this game, maybe they are better than I'm giving them credit for. I've kind of had them pretty consistently down in that 5 spot for most of the season. It really feels like the top 4 are just a cut above in terms of talent, and FlyQuest just feels to be right on the outside of that. But, you know, if they could, come in here and beat Cloud9, who has been kind of underratedly good, I think, for a little while here, maybe we could change our tune. Unfortunately, for all the FlyQuest fans, Cloud9 is able to take this one pretty convincingly off of the back of Blabber's Olaf. I can't believe you let Blabberfish 2 get Olaf again. This really shouldn't be allowed. This is his premier champion, just period. End of story. Obviously, he's good on other ones as well. The Kindred, the Gragas come to mind, but like, Olaf is Blabber's champion, and even when Olaf isn't particularly meta, because he isn't right now, this pick can still genuinely take over the game, and it did. Blabber's really, really good at it. I will say, though, FlyQuest had a little bit of a lead in this game going into the first Herald fight. Unfortunately, all of them in that first Herald fight decided to pour all their CC into the Olaf, and none of it mattered, and they all just died for it. The gold lead was gone, C9 and Herald, and they really just took advantage of the game and took off from there, and that was pretty much it. At that point, no one was going to stop the Olaf. Berserker was able to get his Penta later in the game, because your typical game Penta that Zeri gets at this point in time. Overall, just a really good game from Cloud9. Blabber is going to be my player of the game here. You cannot give this guy Olaf. He is simply too good on that champion for you to consistently give it to him in draft. Obviously, I know Olaf's not meta, but I'm always pro teams playing towards their personal win conditions, right? To their style. If Blabber's really good at Olaf, and if he can play Olaf like this in a meta like this, who cares if it's not meta, quite frankly, because he can play it like it is. You have the Orianna in the mid lane, you throw the ball right onto Olaf, he runs in, not only does he have a shield, but that's a perfect shockwave target. And then, obviously, Zeri is super OP in the back here on the, or Berserker is super OP in the back here on Zeri. Sven does some really good job with engages. Overall, I thought Cloud9 just played this game really well. As for FlyQuest, not a great one. They were in a little bit of control here. I thought Jose Deodo had some really interesting early pathing, but unfortunately, he tried to fight the Olaf early, and that is just simply not the case. Like, you cannot do that against an Olaf. That is the one time of the game where you really need to be cognizant that he's probably just going to beat you, and unfortunately, they didn't heed that advice, so they fell there. And then from that point onwards, it was basically just a jungle gap the rest of the game. So, unfortunately, I'm going to give dud of the game here to Jose Deodo. He's someone who I've been hyping up a lot as a reason that FlyQuest, I think, has been overperforming a lot of their expectations, but he didn't have a particularly great game here, unfortunately. Going into Blabber, probably the best jungler that North America's ever seen. I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh my god, panic button activated, but still something to be aware of. The whole team didn't particularly play well. It wasn't really like one person playing bad. It was more so a lot of the decisions that they made as a unit, as a group, just weren't the right ones. And that's a little bit concerning to me. This is a team that I think really doesn't have a ton of experience in terms of their players, in terms of high pressure situations. It's really just Afromoon. Nobody else on this team has played in like a major game in a major region. Obviously, Jose Deodo has a little bit of experience with that, but Johnson, no. Takuya, no. Philip, no. Like, none of these guys have a ton of experience actively playing in super high pressure situations, potentially trying to get a world spot. So it's definitely intriguing to see how this team is going to react down the stretch, but if this week and this game is any indication, it's not a great start outlook-wise. I think I was pretty spot on with my analysis last week that FlyQuest is a good team, but they're just not a great team. They are probably better than pretty much all the other just plain good teams, but they're just not talented enough, unfortunately, I think, to break into that top 4 that is feeling so lucrative and so secure right now. So, unfortunately for FlyQuest, this win kind of just reiterated that thought in my mind. As for Cloud9, this is a really good win. They're, I think, 6-2 with their bot lane in. Like their actual Berserker and Sven bot lane in. So, this team is actually really good. I might actively be sleeping on how good this team has been. I've had them in 4th all year. There is a chance that they are just simply better than that. And that is something we're going to see later in the week. We're going to get a better answer to that question a little bit later. But as for this win, it was a very good win. And I really like the mentality of them just going to their comfort and going to what they know they can play at the highest possible level instead of just trying to adapt. I think that this is probably the version of Cloud9 that I was most excited to see coming into this week. Moving on to the second game here of day 1 action. We had a game here, maybe not a fun one, but a game here between 100 Thieves and Dignitas. And 100 Thieves very, very cleanly is able to pretty much stomp Dignitas in this game. There were some pretty big gaps here. Dignitas, I should note, making another few changes to their main roster. Obviously, last week, they brought Spawn up, and I was pretty pro that move. I thought Spawn had actually been genuinely great in Academy so far this year. Dignitas Academy was heavily outperforming expectation, mostly due to how Spawn and JJ were playing in that bottom lane. They bring Spawn up to play with Biofrost, and then this week, they continue to kind of shake things up. They make a few trades. River is gone. He is on Golden Guardians now. We will get to that later in the week, and they bring up their top lane and their jungle here from Academy, Hoon and XU. Hoon obviously barely played in Academy. He got in halfway through the year here, and then comes up here. XU's been in Academy all year, and they joined the main roster here, so it's now Hoon, XU, Blue Spawn, and Biofrost here for Dignitas. It certainly isn't helping them right now. That is for sure. We'll talk about Dignitas in a minute, but let's talk about what 100 Thieves did right here. And that's just give Someday a champion that he can carry on. This matchup was very much in 100 Thieves' favor in terms of just mechanical skill, generally speaking. And so they knew if they put Someday on something that he can really bully lane on, that he's going to be fine. It's really not going to be an issue. I really do like the Sylas and the Gnar matchup generally. I think Sylas can do a lot in that laning phase and be super aggressive and punish a lot of positioning mistakes that, quite frankly, Gnars often make because they can get away with it. And then, obviously, Gnar is a phenomenal ult to steal, so in the 1v1, I actually think that Sylas is in a really good spot, and then Sylas also offers, I think, a lot more to your team from ahead than Gnar does from ahead. But Someday played it really well. He played it essentially perfectly. He's going to get my player of the game here. Pretty much not surprising anybody. He was genuinely phenomenal for them this year. He's been great all year long. I think he's kind of been underratedly good. I think a lot of people are talking about how they don't know who the best top laner in North America is. To me, it is very clearly Someday still, and maybe that's just my opinion, but he's been actually fantastic for 100 Thieves in summer. Probably their best and most consistent player all split long. But he had a really good game here, and I want to give a shout out to FBI as well. Not entirely his doing. He does play Sivir here, and obviously we know Sivir got buffed on 12-13, but overall I don't think Sivir's like ridiculously broken. But when no one, not a single person on the enemy team builds an ounce of armor, yeah, it's going to be a little bit of an issue, and so he was just cutting through them like butter towards the back half of that game. It was a lot of damage coming out. Obviously, I knew they wanted to protect against the Sylas, but for no one to build any armor against a Sivir on 12-13 just seems kind of absurd. So definitely not the best building decisions from Dignitas, not the best decisions in general, but 100 Thieves played this game really well, and they definitely played to their win conditions. As for Dignitas, meh, like, this new roster obviously is not going to be winning a lot. I don't think Hoon is very good. XU was really good in spring in Academy, and he took a pretty big step back in summer, at least in my opinion. He was carried a lot by how good his bot lane was. And so it's interesting to see those two up right now, and they certainly didn't perform in this game. I'm definitely looking at Hoon as being a problem for Dignitas here. He got completely embarrassed by Someday in this game here. Not saying that Hoon can't grow into something. I'm definitely more positive about XU, but not to say that Hoon can't grow into something here, but this is somebody who was on the Africa Freaks, Challengers team, never got to play in the LCK, went over to Turkey, and, from what I can read, was viewed as about average when it came to the Turkish league in terms of top lane players, comes over here to NA and is just he wasn't very good in Academy. He comes up now to the main roster and he gets blown back. I'm not super optimistic about Hoon's prospects in the LCS here, especially right now, but this game certainly doesn't help with that. He's going to be my dud of the game. That shouldn't surprise anybody. I am a little bit more positive about XU here. I do think he has a lot of upside. He showed a lot of really good things for this Dignitas team in spring. He was a big reason why they were overperforming expectations to begin with. Him and Spawn obviously were both really good, so I think if they can kind of get into a little bit of form here, I do think they might be able to perform a little bit for Dignitas, not more to take them out of like the bottom spot here, but at the very least I think they could be interesting pieces to at least look at and to watch play for the rest of the year. So something to keep in mind there, but maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something. I just don't really know. I expect a lot more out of XU and Spawn than I do out of Hoon. Outlook-wise, Dignitas is the worst team in the league. There's really no other way to put it. They're not good, and they won't be good. I'm not saying they're tanking the split, but they're definitely taking a look at their young prospects over people on the team that they think can give them more wins. That's why they traded River away. You know, that's why they made the move in the top lane to put Hoon in instead of Gamsu. They're just seeing, I think, what they have in a lot of their players here. And I think it's the right call. This team is not going to be making playoffs, and they're not particularly good outside of that. So they're probably going to be the worst team for the rest of the split, but it is what it is. As for 100 Thieves, I think you can make a real case that this is the best team in LCS right now. So to see them obliterate Dignitas is expected, but it's also good here. Someday continues to be an MVP candidate in my eyes in terms of LCS, and I think FBI and Abadage are starting to get their groove back on. They definitely had a rough start to the year, but it definitely feels like this team is really starting to get back to where they were last year rather than what they were in spring. And that's definitely a good sign if you're a 100 Thieves fan. All right, moving on to our third game here of day one action. We definitely had an interesting game here between Team Liquid and TSM. Team Liquid picking up the win here. A lot of people have been down on Team Liquid recently. I definitely think there was reason for that, but this was a very good game and a very smart game, I think, from TL. Obviously, this was the story of two sides of the map. You had one side investing really heavily into top lane and one side investing really heavily into bot lane. And one of those definitely proved to be more beneficial than the others because investing into Viego and Ornn is not quite as efficient as investing into Misfortune and Rakan. So, yeah, not the best game for TSM here. Team Liquid definitely had the strategy of, okay, we just don't think Instinct is good enough to actively survive all of this pressure that we are going to put his way over and over again, and we're just going to get every dragon, we're going to control this side of the map. And they were right. They were absolutely right. They basically said, sorry, Bwipo, you're going to get dove over and over again, which he did, and unfortunately he died a lot. But it didn't really matter because they were able to kill Instinct so many times that pretty much everybody else on the team had so much gold that these team fights were so simple. They were up like 7k gold at one point. It was really ridiculous how much they were actively able to gain from just going bot lane over and over again. And also they stopped this Jinx from really having any sort of impact on the game. TSM's comp is really built around keeping this Jinx alive in team fights, and when this Jinx is 0-6, like, she's just not going to be doing the damage that you need to be doing at that point in the game for you to win any sort of fight. So, really, a good game plan from Team Liquid, a little bit of a risky one, but at the same time, it was fine. Certainly the best game of the year for this bot lane. I think that they have really struggled in summer so far. I talked a lot in my previous videos about how I think Palafox's names above, summoner names above the players has affected, his comments there. And I think that for the most part, that is true, except I don't really agree that it's been about Bjergsen. I think that has significantly more so been Hansama and Core JJ on Team Liquid as people who have just been extremely disappointing and really are only getting praise because of the names, especially Core JJ. But this was a little bit of a turnaround, I think, this week. Core had a really good game here, just completely obliterated Instinct. This was a non-factor. He was a non-factor this game, but Core was awesome on the Rakan. He's going to get my player of the game here. He was really, really solid. But Hansama also had a really good game here, being able to capitalize on a lot of what Core was able to set up, what Santorin was able to set up with the Wukong. Honestly, just a really good game from the bottom lane. Significantly, and I mean significantly better than what they had been giving us in recent weeks, where they had, quite frankly, been one of the bottom 4 bot lanes in the LCS, as far as I'm concerned, over the past few weeks. Yes, Instinct and Shime are quite low on that list as well, but it is worth noting that a good game is a good game in the LCS, and we'll certainly take it. But yeah, Santorin, Bjergsen, Hansama, Core all played relatively well in this game. Poor Bwipo just had to absorb a shit ton of pressure topside. He died a little bit more than he probably should have in this instance. Obviously, you know, not all of these deaths are excusable, but at the end of the day, like, I'm pretty sure Team Liquid would happily take him dying as many times as he did to get the advantage that they did. As for TSM, obviously the strategy did not work out for them to go top over and over again. I should note, Solo is in here for Soul. Soul did ask to be moved back to Academy. As far as I'm aware, that was a Soul-led conversation and not a conversation led by TSM. If that's what he wants to do, that's fine. That means Solo is up here in LCS, and he actually played pretty well this game. He was probably the best performing member. Him and Speak, I thought, played relatively well here for TSM, but this bot lane, like I said, folded so hard. Instinct is going to get my dud of the game, to no one's surprise at all. Not a good game from Instinct. He has shown basically at the LCS level that he's just not good enough at the moment, and he was showing that in Academy as well, so definitely not a great outlook for TSM. Outlook-wise, I don't think that they're like the bottom of the league, but they really are going to have to do some convincing to be a playoff team, right? Like, it's them and Immortals kind of fighting it out for that 8 spot. I think Golden Guardians has really been on a cold streak as well, so they're kind of falling down into that abyss as well. But right now, like, between them and Immortals fighting for that 8th playoff spot, it's definitely going to be an interesting conversation. They're certainly going to need to turn things around sooner rather than later if they want to get in there. But for Team Liquid, this was as good of a game as you could probably get in this instance. They had been really struggling with macro and decision-making, and they came into this game with a real clear, concise plan, and I definitely think that helps in terms of the outlook of this team, because a lot of times it really just feels like it's all of these really good players playing really well with no goal in mind, like a solo queue game, basically. And I really think that this game, they definitely went into it with a game plan and a strategy, and they executed on it, and it worked, and they were able to win the game off of it. And I really, really, really like to see that. Hopefully they can continue that trend and not just be this aimless group of really talented players that they've been for the rest of the year. Jumping into our 4th game here of day 1 action. We had another interesting one here, and a game that I actually was pretty excited to talk about after it happened, and that is Golden Guardians taking on CLG CmanRocks Gaming. CLG picking up the win here. Golden Guardians obviously running their new roster here with River in the jungle. They acquired him from Dignitas over the course of the week. This is his first game here with a Golden Guardians uniform on, and unfortunately, it's not a very good one for Golden Guardians as they continue their kind of slide down the standings and down my confidence meter as well for a considerable reason, which we'll get to. But let's talk about how CLG really played well in this game. The top side of this map has really come together. I was always really solid about Luger and Poom as a duo. Ever since they joined the LCS, they were one of the more consistently good, maybe not great, but good bot lanes in the LCS. Just someone who I don't think would ever, I'm never really worried about Luger and Poom being a huge problem for your team. It was always this top side that was definitely a question mark for CLG. Contracts would have these games where he would just run it, and Jenkins' last split would not be very good, and Palafox sometimes just isn't very good. Like, I think with this new top side of the map, with Dokla in and Contracts playing like this, and Palafox kind of starting to find form towards the back half of the split, this team is actually a little bit scary, and Contracts played a really good game here. I want to give him player of the game. I know Dokla was a little bit more of the focal point here on the Yone, a pick that he has played an absolute ton of, not only in LCS, but also in Academy this year, but Contracts, I thought, played a genuinely phenomenal game here on the Poppy. This was very much like a jungle-focused team effort, in the sense of Contracts did his best to go into every lane and say, like, I'm the carry, I'm gonna win this game. And he did on Poppy, which is a very difficult pick to actively do that on, but he was very, 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 very scary in this game, and he did a really good job of translating that pressure from top lane to mid lane to bot lane, wherever he needed to be. Contracts was there, and he was able to control the whole map from that, so he's gonna get my player of the game. But, of course, Dokla was also genuinely great here on the Yone. He's been a huge upgrade to Jenkins so far this year. I think Dokla, Big Dokes, has been relatively underrated in terms of the impact that he's had on CLG. Not saying that he's like one of the best top laners in the region or anything like that, but I certainly think that he is one of the more underrated and more consistent top laners. He's going to make big plays. Sometimes he's going to fail, but a lot of times he's going to succeed. He's a very aggressive player, but I think that gives CLG a lot of advantages more than it does take away advantages. So very much, very, very, very much like what Dokla has been offering to this team. And then obviously Palafox, I think, has been a lot better over the course of the past couple weeks. He definitely started off week 1. He was my player of the week 1, and then he had a really rough, like, 2, 3, 4, and then back in 5 and 6, kind of starting to get back on that train of being good again. His pick of LeBlanc here, obviously that's his signature pick. We've seen it for many, many years. That's the pick he feels most comfortable on. Even if it's not meta right now, like I said in the Cloud9 overview, pick what you're good at, because that will help you a lot. So CLG looking good. Golden Guardians, not so much. I just don't know what the problem is with this team, because theoretically they shouldn't play like this, right? Like, Licorice is better than this. He played really bad in this game, and I'm not taking that away. He's my dud of the game for a reason, but we know that Licorice is better than this. We know that a Blaze Olive is better than this. Stixxay is going into a LeBlanc where he tried to 1v1 as Lucian, got clapped, and then proceeded to not upgrade boots the rest of the game. Like, there's just this weird gap that's going on for Golden Guardians that I just can't quite describe. And I don't think River is going to help that. In fact, I think River has been a little bit of a hindrance to Dignitas this year so far, as someone who's been trying to make plays without the assistance of his team and really getting himself in a lot of trouble. I'm not saying that that's what this game was. In fact, I thought him and Ole were really the only two members actively trying to do anything this game for Golden Guardians, but it is certainly something to keep in mind that River isn't just this blanket upgrade that I think everybody just assumes he is. Not that Pride Stalker was good. I do think River is better than Pride, but you know, it is worth, you know, talking about how River has definitely had his struggles this year. But Licorice and a Blaze Olive, not a very good game for those two. Licorice is going to get my dud of the game, but a Blaze Olive wasn't much better. Like I said, Stixxay had some really bad games, or really bad moments in this game overall. Outlook-wise for Golden Guardians, I think they're really slipping. Like, this is a team that's now at 4-8. They were sitting at like 4-5, 4-6. You know, for a little while, and they just haven't been able to buy a win in recent weeks. I'm really thinking that they're just praying that River is the guy that's going to come in and fix all their problems, and I really just don't think that is going to be the case for this Golden Guardians team. I'm very worried about them. I think it is much, much more likely that they fall into that bottom 4 than they do jump back into that top 6. But for CLG, they're going to be very happy about this win. They're kind of contesting FlyQuest, and you know, for that 5 spot, I think it's relatively close between those two. FlyQuest has kind of had CLG's number all year long, but if CLG can continue to get better, I think when Contracts is playing like this and when Doka is playing like this, I really think that they are probably the better team in terms of them versus FlyQuest. So it's all really about the CLG that you get on the day. But this CLG, I think, can beat pretty much anybody in the region that isn't, like, the top teams when they're on. So definitely an interesting game from them, and we're hoping to see a lot more of this in the future. That's going to bring us to our final game here of day 1. And our final game of day 1 was a matchup here, and the closest one of the day here, between Immortals and Evil Geniuses. Kind of a top versus bottom of the table team clash here, but it was very, very close. Mostly due to some topside shenanigans, but we'll get into that. EG is able to pick up the win here in 46 minutes due to a basically 50-50 smite. That's really the best way I can put it here around Baron, or on Elder Dragon, I should say. On Elder Dragon, it was basically a 50-50 smite. Whoever got it, they were probably going to win the team fight. Inspired gets it. They win the team fight. Danny actually plays a really good game here. If it's a little less proactive than I think we're used to from Danny, but still a good game. JoJo is kind of everywhere here with the charms. Those became really influential towards the back half of these fights. And then Inspired. I thought Inspired played a really good game. He was able to control a lot of the map here. Not to say that Kenvi didn't. I actually think both of them had very, very solid games here, but Inspired, I think, was just a little bit more proactive, and obviously that smite at the end of the game was incredibly crucial. That actually basically just won Evil Geniuses the game. The negative here for Evil Geniuses is that I'm pulling the rare card, and I'm pulling it out here because both the player of the game here in Inspired and the dud of the game here are on the same team. Dud of the game's got to go to Impact. He was not good in this one. There's really no other way to put it. Revenge hard outplayed Impact. This was a GG top diff by a lot. It really wasn't even that close. This is one of the biggest diffs in the top lane that we've seen all year long. Unfortunately for Immortals, the rest of the team lost. Power of Evil definitely made some very interesting plays on Talia. Not all of them bad, but certainly not all of them good. Lost was a little bit too safe here on the Aphelios. I hate Aphelios and Mumu as a lane combo. I feel like it's the opposite of what you want to do, and a Mumu into Tahm Kench generally is just a bad matchup in general. Even if Ignar played the game relatively okay, I just don't think there was a lot of opportunity for Lost to get in there before the final few fights, and then by that time he was just outscaled by Danny. But, you know, outside of that, Revenge played a genuinely great game here on the Yone. He actively clapped, and actually, like, I mean this in the nicest way possible. He clapped Impact. It was not close. This laning phase was not close. He was up like 200 CS or something like that. Like, not even just Flame Horizon. He was up like 200 CS by the end of this game. got 6 kills off of him, just completely obliterated Impact. Probably one of the biggest diffs in the top lane I've seen all year long, and unfortunately, it came on the losing team, which is just, it's got to feel bad, but for Impact, unfortunately, this game does deserve the dud of the game. He was the worst player in this game with how he played in this one in particular, but, a win's a win, I guess, right? So, moving on to Immortals and how they played. Like I said, Revenge and Kenvi, I thought played really well. Revenge especially was genuinely phenomenal this game on the Yone. He was able to capitalize a lot on what the Gwen was able to do, but unfortunately towards the end of this game, he just wasn't able to be the one taking over fights. It's really difficult for the Yone to single-handedly beat a Fed Jinx, a Fed Ahri, a Fed Wukong. I understand why this was a big problem, especially with the Tahm Kench. That was keeping them all alive. Like, there was a very little... there was not an easy world for Yone to be able to take over this game, and unfortunately, he just wasn't able to do that. I want to give a lot of credit to Kenvi, though. I thought he created a lot topside and was able to give Revenge the opportunities to be able to play at that aggressive on the Yone, but also I thought he played really well across the map this game. A lot of the plays that this team was making in general, I think were due to Kenvi, and I think we can say that pretty confidently now. Kenvi has gotten better and better every single week. He was someone who, at the beginning of the year, weeks 1 and 2 of summer here, we were talking about him as maybe the worst player in LCS over the course of those first 2 weeks, but he's very much turned that around. I think he's been an asset to Immortals ever since they've kind of gotten their shit together. And we're sitting here with the option where, like, I look at this Immortals team and I can actively say that I trust them more than I trust, say, like a TSM, and especially more than I trust a Dignitas. And that's just certainly not something I think you would have expected to say after they almost got perfect gamed like 3 times in their first 5 games. So at least it's some sort of outlook upgrade for Immortals. Not saying that they're a perfect team. They're still a bottom 3 team, in my opinion. But bottom 3 is not the worst thing in the world in the LCS, because, of course, top 8 teams make the playoffs. So if you're the 8th best team, then you make playoffs. And I think Immortals can very, very well push for that spot. Obviously, they're going to be contesting TSM for that spot. They're going to be contesting potentially Dignitas. I don't think they'll be in that conversation, but they're close record-wise. There are a lot of teams that I think could push for that 8th spot. I think for me, though, Immortals has shown some signs here with Revenge being pretty good. Kenvi kind of getting better week after week. If they can just get more consistency out of the bottom half of their map, I think they're going to be in a better spot. As for EG, they're a little bit shaky right now. Obviously, they have that loss to 100 Thieves last week that you don't love to see. And they come out and they beat Immortals, which is really good. Most of the players on this team playing well, but obviously Impact getting crushed isn't the best sign in the world, and this team starting to show a little bit of the cracks that I think were expected and that they showed a lot in spring regular season. Hopefully they can turn it around. I think everybody and their mom is rooting for this Evil Geniuses team to repeat here and win summer. But, obviously, as an analyst, I'm just not sure I can predict that right now. They are showing a little bit of weakness, and that's the kind of stuff that can be taken advantage of in playoffs. Obviously, I don't expect Impact to play like this throughout the rest of the season, but it is certainly something worth noting that it is possible. So we'll have to see what happens with EG for the rest of the week, because this wasn't the most dominant win that they could possibly have given. That's going to bring us to day 2 here in week 6 of the LCS, and day 2 was kicked off with a matchup here between TSM and Golden Guardians. And TSM's actually able to pick up a win here. Golden Guardians continue their slide down the standings and their questionable, I'll say at best, play on the top side. But TSM with a really, really good win here. They absolutely needed this. This is a team that I think has really been searching just for a sign that they're making some semblance of correct moves. And even when these players are playing relatively well, it's just hard to get that idea. But this game was definitely in the camp of, okay, maybe we are moving in the right direction. I want to point out Chime, because Chime obviously was phenomenal in this game. He gets the player of the game, and everybody's going to be talking about it. But I think secretly Chime, ever since he came into TSM, has actually been maybe their best player, like ever since he started playing in the LCS. I really like what he's been able to do here in the support role. Even when Instinct is playing bad, like just generally bad, I think he's the kind of player who's really good at impacting the whole map and not just his lane. Yes, I think he does well for his lane, but I think him and Spica have really gotten a good synergy very quickly at being able to impact mid lane, at being able to make sure that the jungle pressure remains intact. Like, I really like what Chime has been able to do for this TSM team. Obviously, he was phenomenal in this game on the Bard, his signature champion, and he gets player of the game for it. But I think his contributions to this TSM team have been bigger than just this one game. And I'm really excited to see if he can maybe solidify a spot in the LCS this split with his time on TSM. Because honestly, he was really killing it in Academy. And I know he had that really bad split on Golden Guardians last year, but I think maybe he's learned and grown a lot in that time, and he's really looking a lot better now on TSM this year than he ever did last year, so that's a good look. Also, shout out Solo, just being in the top lane and being exactly what this team needs, which is this stable, not super, like, aggressive, but not going to lose you the game kind of top laner, someone who's willing to go on tank duty. I'm really happy to see Solo get another shot. He was actually really struggling in Academy when he was playing there for TSM, but he comes back up here to the main roster, and he's actually been really, really good ever since he came up. He's been really stable. I think a lot of teams were really adverse to signing Solo, and obviously you hear the reports, you know, on pretty much all these games that Solo's kind of a scrim nightmare of, you know, he'll just die to every single gank and scrims, and obviously I think teams have this idea of scrims because they play so many more scrims than they do stage games that scrims are a better indicator of talent than stage games, but every time we've seen Solo on the stage, relatively, he's performed. I'm not saying he's always been perfect, but he's never been awful. Like, he's always been at least okay on stage, and that's better than I think a lot of top laners in this region can give you, so those two moves are actually looking pretty good. Spica's got his groove back here. Maple and Instinct both had good games. Honestly, overall, TSM's going to be very happy with this win, I think. As for Golden Guardians, very concerned at this point, because not only are they struggling and they're really falling off a cliff after a pretty good start to the split, and obviously they had a promising spring, but the player that I think was playing really well for them at the beginning of the split in Licorice has fallen completely off of a cliff. He was having some really good games, I think, earlier in the split, on the Gnar, on the Fiora especially. These were some picks that I think were really, really positive for Golden Guardians, but now they're being taken away, and Licorice is looking really bad. He's going to get my dud of the game again here. He did earlier in the week as well. Just not a good week overall for Licorice. Not to say the rest of the team is playing all that better. I still think River is not being a very good jungler. Like, there's really no other way for me to put it. I still think River is being a problem for his team. He's not really gaining control. He's losing pressure. He's basically just saying, like, okay, well, I'm Poppy. I'm going into a Xin Zhao, so I guess I'll just concede a lot of the early pressure and we'll get it back in late game team fights. But this team doesn't have the talent to get it back in late game team fights, so they just never end up getting it back. A Blaze Olive goes Gale Force on Corki, which everybody knows I am super against. I think that's basically the waste of a Mythic. And I thought 6A actually played pretty okay. Ole wasn't great on the Sejuani anyways, but really, this team, like, outlook-wise, has really fallen off a cliff for me in terms of how I perceive them. Obviously, I think that there is talent on this team, but if Licorice is going to be playing like this, I don't... And obviously, if River continues to play like he had the last few weeks here on Dignitas, and then this week again on Golden Guardians, then, like, this team isn't a top... Like, this team isn't going to be competing at all for top 6. Like, right now, I have them pretty severely at 7, but this has me believe they're a lot closer to 8 or 9 than they are to 7, which definitely concerns me because this is a team that should have felt pretty confident about at least making a playoff spot, even if it was a lower bracket playoff spot, but they have really, really fallen apart in the last few weeks. Hopefully they can get it together because I do like the talent on this team overall. But moving on to TSM's outlook, this is a good win for them. It's not the best possible win, but they're now tied with Golden Guardians in terms of record. They put themselves in a decent position to actually get as high as 7th, I think, by the end of this regular season. I know a lot of people were really hoping that TSM would fall out of playoffs because of how funny that would be for 2 splits in a row, but it's looking a lot like TSM is going to have a pretty clear avenue to making playoffs as long as they continue to beat the teams that they should beat. They don't have to come out here and beat 100 Thieves. They don't have to come out here and beat Evil Geniuses. If they can beat up on Golden Guardians, if they can beat up on Dignitas, if they can beat up on Immortals, they should secure their spot in playoffs. And from there, obviously, anything can happen, but I don't think the upside of this team is that high. So I think really best case scenario, you're looking at a lower bracket playoff team here for TSM that is probably a first round out, but at least they made it, you know what I mean? And that is certainly within reach for a team that I think was a little bit scared that it wasn't going to be for most of this split. Moving on to the second game here of day 2, and the second game was certainly an interesting one here between Evil Geniuses and FlyQuest. Rough week for FlyQuest having to take on Cloud9 and EG, and EG unfortunately makes sure that week for FlyQuest goes 0-2 as they pick up the win here. Obviously, I still have a little bit of concern about this roster. I think Impact still played a relatively not great game here on the Sejuani. Certainly some plays where he died and went in unnecessarily. But outside of that, I thought everybody on EG actually was really, really good this week. Most notably, and yes, I mean it, Inspired. What a shock. Everybody's been talking about Inspired so much this split. He's my player of the game here. Obviously, he was so fantastic on the Wukong. Not only was he making plays early game, but he was able to, somehow control Jose Deodo's mind to be able to try and fight him 1v1 later in the game as Wukong versus Lee Sin. And then he was able to secure every objective. He was up in farm. It was just a jungle diff pretty much in every aspect. And you credit all of that to Inspired. And he is playing incredibly well. A lot of people are talking about him as the front runner for MVP so far this year. I think for a lot of the year, I don't know if I was necessarily on that train as much as everybody else was. Yes, I thought Inspired was really good, but I do think that there were players that you could at least make the case for being more important to their team's success than Inspired, where I think a lot of EG's success was a team effort. I think everybody on this team is playing well. But I think in the last few weeks, he has really separated himself from the pack as being one of the better players. I'm definitely getting more on board with the Inspired for MVP argument, especially if EG manages to get the best record in the regular season. I think that's going to help his case quite a bit. But yeah, a very good game from Inspired. Certainly not the only one. I actually thought Danny was really phenomenal in this game on the Kalista. It was, this is how you play Kalista, right? Kalista, I think, has been getting a lot of flame, especially from LEC fans in general, because nobody in the LEC knows how to play Kalista. But, Kalista's been getting a lot of flame from fans for, oh, this pick is bait. She doesn't actually win lane. It's very difficult. I completely disagree. I think you just have to play it super aggro in the way that Danny and Vulcan did in this game. And yes, they gave away first blood, but the power of Kalista actually let them be able to fight a lot even after that, first back, able to go back in. And Aphelios really couldn't do a lot about it. The Alistar really wasn't able to do a lot about it either. And she was able to get a lot of gold and was able to contribute late game in a way that someone like a Lucian, who's also considered a really early game pick, is just simply not able to do. I really do like the Kalista pick when you're able to pull it off, and I thought Danny and Vulcan certainly pulled it off in this game. But overall, I thought EG played really well, maybe outside of some weird impact plays. EG was just really, really solid as a team this game, mostly off the back of Inspired. But FlyQuest, not so much. An 0-2 week is not exactly what you wanted to see from a team that I think a lot of people were really excited about. We're kind of hoping we're going to start breaking away from the rest of the pack, maybe making a Worlds push. They've come crashing back down to earth a little bit, playing some of the top teams here. They've had a really, really easy schedule over the past few weeks. They finally start getting to the hard part of their schedule, and they start showing exactly what they are. And I'm not saying that my opinion on FlyQuest has really changed at all. I'm not saying that I'm lower on them than I was last week or anything like that. Honestly, quite frankly, they are doing exactly what I said they would and what I predicted them to do. A lot of people out there were talking about them as a top 3, top 4 team in the league, and I just did not see it. I know they were there when it came to the standings, but in terms of how they were playing on the Rift and the opposition that they were playing against, I expected a drop-off back down to number 5, and it really feels like that's pretty much exactly what has happened for FlyQuest. Jose Deodo with a pretty rough week here. He picks the Lee Sin, and I know I was just talking about how I don't think Kalista is bait. I very much think Lee Sin is bait right now. Lee Sin is just not a good pick overall. He's a pick that's very, very strong for about 5 to 10 minutes of the game, and then after that, you better hope that you got your laners some gold, because he's just not going to be able to continue that momentum. He's just not a champion that has any sort of power late game, and if you're not super far ahead, it just feels like he's completely useless towards the middle to end of the game. And that's really what we saw here, is Jose Deodo wasn't super far ahead towards the beginning of the game. He tried to make a play towards the mid game on Inspired, and Lee Sin is just simply not a champion that can do something like that right now. Takuya is not an Akali player as well. That's certainly something to point out. I very much think of Takuya as a control mage player, not to say he can't play assassins, but typically we like to see Akali into Azir if you have a very aggressive jungle that you can really capitalize on. You can try to punish that Azir in the mid game, not so much the early game, because the early game he can just play so safe. But in the mid game, unfortunately, Lee Sin's just not going to be that jungler, and so it was just never going to work. Johnson wasn't able to, win any trades after getting first blood here on Danny, and the game was basically over for FlyQuest. Outlook-wise for this team, like I said, my opinion of them really has not changed. Them going 0-2 this week was expected for me. I think they were considerably worse than both Cloud9 and EG in terms of talent on the roster, and I didn't expect them to be able to take either game. Obviously, I think there were a lot of hopefuls out there that were saying that they maybe could be playing up to their standing of 3rd place in the league. I never saw them like that. They are exactly what I think they are. They're around that 5-6 spot, right with CLG kind of in that cluster of teams that I think can win games, but just I don't think they're going to be in that same conversation as the top 4, especially come playoff time. As for EG, a 2-0 week here is definitely going to be exciting for them after, that rough loss last week to 100 Thieves to kind of halt their momentum. They're kind of back on here, especially with Inspired playing like this. Danny, I thought, relatively had a great week. Even if Impact had one of the worst weeks of the split for him personally, I think the team around him was able to collect themselves and play relatively fine here. If Inspired continues to play like this, if Danny and JoJo and Vulcan all continue to play like this, I don't expect to see this team anywhere lower than 1 or 2 when it comes to the end of the regular season. Now, obviously, it'll be interesting to watch all of these teams in playoffs because I think there are a lot of unknowns when it comes to a lot of these rosters, but EG have certainly put themselves in a good position to basically control their own destiny going into that position. Moving on to our third game here of Day 2 action, and our third game was definitely an interesting one that I think a lot of people were looking at as maybe potentially the game of the week, and that was Cloud9 taking on Team Liquid. And this is kind of a battle for teams kind of in that 3 to 4 spot in my power rankings, kind of all fighting it out for maybe they're on the world spot, maybe they're not, and Cloud9's actually able to take this one in pretty good fashion. I will say this game was kind of boring, and there were certainly moments where I was like, do something. But at the end of the day, Cloud9 is able to pick up the win here off of the back of Berserker playing some really good late game Kalista, which you don't hear me say often, but certainly a sentence that it rings true in this one. Berserker was very, very good towards the back half of this game. He's going to get my player of the game here for Cloud9. He was really, really solid. He's been really solid all year long, even if, quite frankly, he hasn't quite been the dominating force I think that he was in spring for Cloud9, where it very much felt like in spring, a lot of Cloud9's wins were around Berserker, and they would often play around bot lane, but this play is a little bit different. I think oftentimes they're playing around Blabber, and maybe Jensen's getting a bit more looks because him in the mid lane, I think, is a little bit more, you know, he's expecting more resources, quite frankly. But I think Berserker is still this team's best player, maybe with the exception of Blabber. I certainly think you can make an argument either way, but those two are clearly the ones that you want to be playing around, and Berserker showed why in the late game here as his Kalista was able to take over the 25-minute Elder Dance that these two teams wanted to do. But, yeah, I thought Blabber played really well here on the Hecarim. Obviously, Hecarim, I think, is a pick that this team is quite frankly known for, whether it be Blabber or other junglers on this team's history. Hecarim has always been a pick that I think that Cloud9 has really loved, and Blabber's certainly not shied away from the pick. I talked about this in Cloud9's first win over FlyQuest. I really like the idea of Cloud9 going to comfort over meta, and especially because, in my opinion, I talked about this in I believe my LEC video, or maybe it was my LCK video this week, where I think Hecarim is a completely underrated pick right now in the meta. I really think Hecarim can cause a lot of damage, especially in a meta where picks like Sivir and picks like Yuumi are considered good. I think Hecarim can actually be a really dangerous pick in the meta right now, even if you don't run those. Zeri, I think, is also a good partner for it. Just generally speaking, I think Hecarim can do a lot of good things for your team, and I think he's underrated, I think, generally as a pick right now. Blabber coming out and doing a lot of good work on the Hecarim, creating a lot of panic for this Team Liquid team, because he's going to go in, and it's fun to watch. So, shout out Blabber, shout out Berserker. They were the two best players on this team. I thought Sven played pretty well on the Renata as well. Nothing, like, outstanding, though. As for Team Liquid, like, this is just another one of those games where it feels like they had it and they should have been able to do a lot more with it, but they just don't have that late game decision making. They still very much feel like a solo queue team. I know I was hoping and praying that after the game earlier this week against TSM that would go away. That certainly has not gone away for the end game. This team's post 20 minutes decision making is bad. Like, there's really no other way to put it. This team does not make good decisions later in the game. But I don't think that was it, right? This draft is very confusing to me. Not only are you going to pick the Kog'Maw, okay, that's fine, but you have the Ahri mid. All right, well, you need to go something sort of protective in the top lane, because right now you have absolutely nothing that's going to keep that's going to be able to peel for the Kog'Maw. So you go Olaf, and Olaf is, and I get it, you wanted to take the pick away from Blabber because you realized you kept it up, even though you just banned out Poppy, Jarvan, Xin Zhao, none of which Blabber are really, I mean, Xin Zhao you played a lot of, but none of which are really, like, Blabber picks, right? But you instead take the Olaf and you go top lane. Well, now this comp really has zero peel. Like, you are running Kog'Maw and you have Ahri Charm and you have shields for Kog'Maw, but you have nothing to really help people get off of the Kog'Maw if the Wukong's engaging. That's a problem. And that proved to be a problem, especially in these late game team fights where Kog'Maw would get blown up pretty much instantly, and then you just quite frankly wouldn't have the damage to be able to win those fights against the Kalista, against an Azir. It was really, really a confusing draft, I think, overall for Team Liquid. They've had quite a few of those, but I can't blame it all on draft. There was a lot of passive decision-making, as this team has been known for throughout the game, or throughout the split so far, and the year just in general, of you hit this point in the game, and TL's just like, well, we're going to wait for the enemy to make a mistake, and then they just sit there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. and they never actually make a decision. It's very frustrating to watch. I'm not sure who to blame for it, but it's certainly not great. Bwipo's gonna get my dud of the game here just again because the Olaf pick did absolutely nothing. Not only was the pick useless, but Bwipo was useless on the pick, and so unfortunately there was just not a lot that he was actually able to do in this game, which is frustrating to watch. But overall, outlook-wise, TL is, I think, becoming who we think they are. That's, what, like the 5th straight week they've gone 1-1? They have these games where they can beat up on worse teams. They beat up on TSM, they have an early game strategy, and they don't really need to have this really decisive late game decision-making because they're so far ahead, right? But when you go up against other teams that are going to be able to have these early games and be able to contest you talent-wise, they simply do not have the macro late game to be able to contest these teams. And it's very concerning. It's getting to be to the point where I don't even know if this is a Worlds team right now, which would be a complete disaster for this roster. They need to figure out whatever the problem is after 20 minutes. They need to just get more decisive. They need to scrim over and over and over again and just say, screw it, we're doing this, and we're doing this, and we're all going in, whether it's the right play or not, we're just making a play, because right now they're just not doing anything. That would be my mindset for Team Liquid, but hopefully this team doesn't just roll over and die over and over again like they've been doing all year long. As for Cloud9, a great week for them, being able to knock off FlyQuest and Team Liquid, two teams that I think a lot of people were having a little bit of confidence in the past few weeks. Berserker looks really good. Blabber especially looked really good this week. He's someone who I think continues to add to his resume. He's definitely in the MVP conversation for me. And he's had a really, really underratedly good year for Cloud9. If this team can really build upon this, they might have the highest ceiling of any team in the LCS. Like, when they're on, it really feels like nobody can really match them in terms of talent. So hopefully this team can continue to grow, can continue to maximize their ability to play not only early game, but late game as well, where they've really been able to dominate. And I'd love, love, love to see this team make a playoff run towards the back half of this year. Moving on to our 4th game here of Day 2 action, and it certainly was a 4th game, one that I am relatively excited to talk about, but only because, man, I did not like watching it. And of course, I am talking about 100 Thieves taking on Immortals here. 100 Thieves win, I think. They won the game. They didn't do anything to win the game, but they did. I mean, it looks like they got another win in the win column, so I guess that means they won the game. And Immortals lost the game. That's certainly something. We'll get to Immortals in a bit, but let's talk about 100 Thieves right now. I think Huhi said it best in his post-game interview here, where he was like, yeah, this game was really boring. We didn't do anything. And he was right. This game was boring, and they didn't do anything. And yet, somehow, they walked away with a win in 32 minutes. With 7 kills. Hooray. Like, man, this was just brutal. This was actually brutal to watch. This was a game between two teams that were anti-proactive. Like, I don't know what 100 Thieves was actually doing in this game, but it certainly wasn't trying to win. They ended up walking into a win. I mean, congratulations. Like, Immortals was trying to make plays, but they're just not good enough of a team, so they just kind of threw, and eventually 100 Thieves was just like, okay, I guess we'll win the game. And they did. That's great. I thought Someday played pretty okay on the Gnar, but outside of that, there was not really anybody on this team that I think was actively trying to win the game. FBI was kind of a non-factor. Huhi was actively running it at points. Abadage did nothing on Talia, and Closer picked the biggest trap pick in the game in Lee Sin. So, yay! Like, congrats, 100 Thieves, you won the game! But I just not the most outstanding win of all time. Someday is going to get my player of the game here, because at least he was playing kind of okay on the Gnar. Like, he was making plays, but nobody else on this team really was, so not the best game overall from 100 Thieves, but I guess a win's a win. As for Immortals, like, you're just not very good. There's really no other way to put it. I thought Kenvi actually played pretty well here. For the most part, I thought Kenvi played better than Closer in this game, which is definitely a good sign overall. Kenvi, like I said earlier this week, has just been getting better week after week after week after having a really rough start to the split. But yeah, honestly, he was pretty good in this game, arguably better than Closer. It was really the rest of the team that was just like, oh my god, do something, and when you do something, don't make it the worst thing you can do. Like, Revenge had some good plays, but he also had some really bad plays. Power of Evil did literally nothing in this game. He's going to get my dud of the game for it. Specifically because there were a lot of people in this game that did absolutely nothing, but Power of Evil, I think, was atop of that list. PoE has just continued to be checked out, I think, mentally. That's the best way I can put it. It's not that his playstyle was always like this, because I think a lot of people associate PoE with just, like, super passive play, but, like, go back and watch FlyQuest. Go back and watch TSM last year. Like, yes, like, PoE can be, you know, kind of a farm up till late game, but it's not like he's just a quote-unquote strictly passive player. Like, this isn't somebody who is just sitting there doing nothing and waiting for the enemy team to make a mistake. Like, he was actively making plays. He just wasn't doing it in the same way that I think a lot of other... He wasn't roaming to do it. He would get himself ahead, and then he would look to make plays. But right now, he just looks completely checked out. It very much looks like he's not even attempting to try and win games. Don't love to see that. He's going to get my dud of the game here. I think there's a very real possibility that you could put someone like Pretty in here, who is an import, but so is PoE, so it balances out. And he would just be better here for Immortals, and he's sitting down in Academy, and he's been relatively good. I certainly think giving him a shot wouldn't be the worst idea in the world, but, you know, at this point, Immortals, I don't really care what you do. Loss continues to not really be a factor. Ignar continues to try and make plays, but the rest of his team don't want to cooperate. Overall, it was just a really weird game, because at the end of the day, it felt like Immortals was, like, playing better. Like, they were at least trying to make plays, but they're just not good. Like, they're not a good team, so when they tried to make plays, they would often open themselves up for counterattacks, and that's where 100 Thieves would strike. So outlook-wise, I still kind of like Immortals. At least they were trying to do stuff in this game, and they certainly are a better team than they were in the first couple weeks of the season, but they're just not talented enough to make it work, right? Kenvy's playing fine. Revenge is certainly making some good plays, but nobody else on this team is really actively trying, and it's very frustrating to watch, so hopefully they can turn it around. Hopefully you can kind of get these guys back in shape in terms of the mental, but right now it just certainly doesn't seem to be on the table. For 100 Thieves, I mean, they're going to be happy to get a win here because they didn't do anything to deserve this win. Not the best week, I think, for them overall. Obviously, this win isn't great, but earlier in the week, in their match against Dignitas, like, I think you can make an argument that, like, if Someday doesn't destroy Hoon, that game's a lot closer, so not the best week overall, I think, for 100 Thieves. They're certainly going to take a 2-0 week, but for a team that was number 1 in my power rankings last week, I don't necessarily feel as confident in them last week as I do right now, which is, you know, not a good sign. So, yeah, I mean, for 100 Thieves, hopefully they start to hunker down a little bit more as we get closer to playoff time, and for Immortals, at least they're getting better, but this is really a game that you should be winning if 100 Thieves is going to be playing like this. That's going to bring us to our 5th and final game of Day 2 action here in Week 6 of LCS. And it was an interesting one here. Certainly a game here between Counterlogic Gaming, CLG, and Dignitas. Kind of two classic organizations going to battle here that maybe haven't had the best of recent times, but CLG certainly turning it around, and as they pick up another win here and go 2-0 this week, they're going to be very excited about that. They're really starting to pick up the pace here, and I really like what this team is doing. Like I said earlier in the week, I really think this bot lane has been hyper-consistent for them, even when you've had Contracts running it in the top side, and Jenkins wasn't very good last split, and Palafox certainly has had his ups and downs. I think Luger and Poom have always been the constants of, like, they're never going to be bad, and in this game, they were really good. You get Luger the Draven. Draven, I think, is a really good pick into Kalista right now. Not even just into Kalista. I think Draven's honestly just underrated as a pick overall. We're seeing it quite a bit in the LCK, and we're seeing it do really, really well there, as well as the LEC. We saw it a little bit this past weekend, but overall, just a really good game here from Luger on the Draven. He's going to get my player of the game here for CLG. He continues to be a bright spot. Him and Poom are one of the most underrated duos in League right now in terms of just how they play. I feel like I never hear them brought up in terms of like top 4, top 3 bot lanes in North America, but they're certainly within that conversation. I'm not saying they're exactly there, but, you know, they're within the conversation of being able to be talked about in that regard because they really have been great. They've been better than a bot lane like Hansama and Core JJ for the most part of Summer Split so far, which I don't think a lot of people would have expected, but honestly, that's the truth. Like, these two played really, really well together, and they had a really great game here, kind of destroying Spawn and Biofrost. But they weren't the only ones. I thought Contracts certainly made some good plays in this game on the Xin Zhao. A pick that overall I'm not a huge fan of right now, but I think, you know, when you're better, you can make it work, and he certainly made it work in this game. I think he certainly made some really bad plays as well towards the end, flashing out of the Chaos Storm right into a Kalista where he just dies. Like, shout out Contracts, he's going to have at least one of these, like, really stupid inti plays per game, but that's why we love him. That's why we love Contracts. There's really no other, you know, player in the league that I think gives you heart attacks quite like he does, but shout out Contracts. I thought he played well for most of this game. Doka and Palafox were fine, but really, this was a bot lane focused game for CLG. For Dignitas, they're just not very good, right? Like, they just don't have the talent level to be able to compete on that same level with CLG. I thought Hoon and Exu were not so good in this one, and then Spawn is actually going to get my dud of the game here. I've been hyping up Spawn for quite a while, and I thought he actually played really well last week in his first week in LCS, but he was a little bit of a downgrade this week. I think this team is just kind of in a really rough spot mentally because there's really no one on this team that I think has a lot of confidence that they can win games. Maybe Biofrost is like the only one who's been able to be in LCS for long enough to know, like, okay, maybe we'll be able to turn it around, but Spawn is basically a rookie, XU's a rookie, Hoon is a rookie, basically. Like, none of these guys have a ton of experience. Blue has really only played on bad teams in his time in pro, with the exception of his time in Turkey, but, you know, like, I don't really know. You know, the mental on this Dignitas team seems broken. Spawn wasn't very good on Kalista this game. He got hard counterpicked with that Draven and was just not able to do anything. Luger was outplaying him for most of this game on the Draven against that Kalista, so not great. Biofrost was fine. He helped him out a bit, but not great. Blue actually had a relatively okay game here. I think if there's anybody on Dignitas where you're going to be like, yeah, he was okay, it was probably Blue, who I thought played relatively okay here, although Blue has kind of been a huge problem for Dignitas for most of the splits, so one game doesn't exactly change my opinion on him. And then Hoon and XU just aren't good enough to be in the league at this point. Like, there's really no other way to put it. Outlook-wise for these two teams, Dignitas is bad. They're the worst team in the league. They're 2-11. I don't see them making playoffs. I don't see them somehow getting top 8. In fact, I would be surprised if they won a game the rest of the year. I really just don't think this roster has the talent to be able to beat anybody, although knowing LCS, I'm pretty sure anybody can beat anybody because even the best teams in the league will just sometimes not show up and just lose games for no reason. So, you know, Dignitas, I guess, has a chance to win a few games towards the end of the split, but talent-wise, I just don't think I will ever predict them to win a game for the rest of the split if they continue to play like this. As for CLG, they're putting themselves in the FlyQuest conversation that they were in last week, right? Of like, they're tied for third now with Cloud9 and Team Liquid. They're kind of in this Worlds conversation, right? But are they better than any of those teams? Like, on paper, probably not. I think they're right around that same level of somebody like a FlyQuest. I certainly think it's going to be an interesting matchup when those two teams meet, and I would very much like to see them meet in playoffs in a best of 5 to really see which team is kind of the best of the next. And I think whichever one, you know, wins that series, if FlyQuest kind of sweeps CLG in the regular season, I think that would certainly be an interesting tell that maybe FlyQuest is the best chance that we have of another team going to Worlds. But CLG certainly in the conversation here with this 2-0 week. Luger and Poom continue to be good. If Dokla, Contracts, and Palafox continue their successful early games here that I think they're having, this team could very much be dangerous. It's just the consistency that I'm always going to be worried about with a team with Contracts and Palafox and Dokla on, because all of them can, one of these games, just play too aggressive and get flipped on if they're not careful. So, you know, against these bad teams, like, I'm glad they're picking up wins, but they should be picking up wins. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they start playing some of the best teams in the league. All right, that is going to do it for my Week 6 LCS overview and analysis of all 10 games across both days that weekend. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated LCS standings from 1 to 10. Any ties will just be broken alphabetically. In the first column, you're going to see my power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. You can go over the biggest risers, the biggest fallers, but first, we're going to see some colors on the screen for some highlighted teams. Those are the teams that have currently clinched playoffs. And that means that currently Evil Geniuses and 100 Thieves are the two teams in North America that have clinched making playoffs and put themselves in a really good position to get that first round bye that I think a lot of teams are really looking for in the playoffs here that 1 and 2 get. So EG and 100 Thieves definitely leading the pack on that right now, and in my power rankings, it definitely represents that. 100 Thieves beat up on EG last week, so I actually had them leapfrog, but I felt way more confident in EG after this week than I did 100 Thieves, so EG is going to move back up to that number 1 spot with 100 Thieves dropping to number 2. And then we have another leapfrog here as Cloud9 jumps up to number 3, TL falling down out of the world spots, or projected world spots here, to number 4 in my power rankings. Cloud9 just look like a way more consistent team. They've actually looked a lot better in the most recent weeks. I think even Jensen, someone who I've been really hard on, has been playing a lot better for Cloud9. I think the rest of that roster, Berserker and Blabber, are a very scary duo, and I think them playing together can be a really dangerous thing, and I think right now I just trust them more than I trust TL, who, at the end of the day, has just been very inconsistent. They're 1-1 in the past 5 weeks. Like, I want to see some consistency, and I especially want to see some decision-making towards the end of these games. So until then, they're going to be out of these playoff spots. The only other leapfrog that I'm doing this week is going to be TSM jumping up to number 8 and Immortals dropping back down to number 9. TSM looked a lot better this week, and even though Immortals, I think, is getting better and better, I'm not sure I have the confidence that they're going to be able to win out in the necessary way that they'll need to in order for TSM to fall out of that 8 spot. So for me, you know, GG very close to falling down to number 8, TSM close to jumping up to number 7. I think you could really make a case that CLG should be above FlyQuest as well, but FlyQuest had a much harder week in terms of opposition than CLG did, so both things that I definitely considered in making my decision. Moving on, though, to my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week 6. And my week 6 player of the week in the LCS is going to go to Inspired on Evil Geniuses. I've kind of been lower on Inspired than a lot of other people throughout most of the year so far, at least in terms of MVP conversation, but this week really proved why I think he's the front runner in that conversation. He was really, really genuinely phenomenal for Evil Geniuses, probably his best week of the season, and he continues to show that even though everybody on EG is contributing, he's really the one that all of them are mostly playing through. So very, very high on how Inspired played this week. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Licorice on Golden Guardians, who, after having a pretty solid start to the year, has just completely fallen off a cliff in the last few weeks. I think he has been really, really disappointing just overall, and I don't know if I expect that to change too much. This Golden Guardians outlook just isn't looking very good. They've lost 4 games in a row now, 0-4 in the last 2 weeks, and I don't expect that to change too much. They're really not on a very good trend right now, and Licorice is a big part of that. He was someone who I think they could really rely on for a lot of the beginning part of the year, and he just hasn't been able to come through. Even with River joining the team, I'm not sure that's enough for Golden Guardians to make me feel comfortable about them. So, yeah, that's going to do it. Dud of the week is going to be Licorice in week 6, and player of the week is going to be Inspired. So, yeah, that's going to be it. If you guys enjoyed, let me know down in the comment section below. Please leave a like if you did like this video. It really does mean a lot for the channel. And, of course, let me know your player of the week, your dud of the week, your game of the week, all that fun stuff down in the comment section below. I really love chatting it up with you guys. You all know that at this point, though. So, with that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.